Paris. The city that oozes with sophistication, romance, and culture has been the inspiration for, well, just about everyone. This city of lights and love is a breathtaking destination that every traveler needs to visit at least once in their lifetime.
Welcome to Tourism Unfiltered, a podcast that investigates the impact of social media on modern-day tourism. This is the second episode and the first time I will be focusing on a specific city. And if you haven't already guessed it, today's episode will be focusing on Paris, France. Paris has always been an iconic city when it comes to popular media, frequently featured as a backdrop in artwork, movies, and books. It should be no surprise that Paris has also found its way to social media as well. As a matter of fact, AP News reported that Paris welcomed 48.7 million tourists in 2024, which was a 2% increase from just the previous year. While the statistics on tourists in France in 2025 have yet to be published, I can confidently say that I was one of these tourists last year as I studied abroad in France over the summer. This allowed me to gain a lot of first-hand experience with some of the topics that will be discussed today, which is why I'm so excited to dive into this episode. I want to start by talking about the concept of gatekeeping in Paris. Gatekeeping can be defined as the act of limiting or controlling information so a certain group doesn't find out about it. This act of gatekeeping is essentially how Paris was allowed to be separated between the residents and the tourists in the past. There are obviously certain historical sites in Paris that most tourists are familiar with, like the Eiffel Tower, the Louvre, and the Arc de Triomphe. However, outside these tourist areas, it is less likely for tourists to be found if they are unaware of other neighborhoods and businesses in Paris, so residents, in theory, cannot be bothered by tourists. Even a popular tourist site like the Louvre has been known to have its own levels of gatekeeping, as mentioned by author Elaine Sciolino, who wrote the book Adventures of the Louvre: How to Fall in Love with the World's Greatest Museum. Elaine was featured in an interview for the podcast Eye on Travel with Peter Greenberg, where she spoke about her writing process. One of Elaine's original plans was to have conversations with the workers of the Louvre to ask them about their favorite areas of the museum that were considered hidden or lesser known, and her questions were met with resistance to the point where Elaine couldn't speak to the workers without an assigned chaperone present.
Well, Peter, you and I are reporters, and what do reporters do? They go places that nobody else goes, and you try to find secrets. So I thought, you know what? Let me go in there as a journalist, and so let me interview everybody I possibly can.
Well, let me ask you a question then. Were they happy to see you?
It depended on the day. In the beginning, the Louvre sent out a confidential memo telling all Louvre employees who had to deal with me that this book could be a risk, and that they were only allowed to talk to me in the presence of a Louvre assigned chaperone or minder.
Oh boy.
So I had to be escorted to every single official interview, which made it extremely difficult.
I find it very interesting that Elaine is implying the management at the Louvre doesn't want visitors to know too much about all the Louvre has to offer, especially when the museum offers memberships that are predominantly held by French citizens who want to visit the Louvre anytime they like. This example highlights the practice of gatekeeping, as the Louvre management are essentially preventing these hidden gems in the museum from becoming widespread information available to tourists. While the Louvre already has issues with overcrowding, the majority of tourists head to see the Mona Lisa first and just end up wandering through the surrounding wings afterwards, since the museum is so big that it is unrealistic to fully explore everything within a day. Controlling the information that Elaine includes in her book essentially means the members of the Louvre can continue to enjoy less crowded sections of the museum in peace. However, gatekeeping certain areas of Paris to residents only doesn't always work. That is currently the case with the Montmartre neighborhood in the 18th arrondissement, or neighborhood, of Paris. Montmartre is known for its artist market, trendy souvenirs, and its high-up views of the entire city. This all being said, Montmartre has become more visited by tourists in Paris than the Eiffel Tower, receiving 11 million visitors a year. The French news source Le Monde has referred to this recent flocking to Montmartre as Disney-fication, with tourist trap attractions taking over the streets that include cartoon-like trains for tourists that go up the hill, ice cream and crepe vendors, and the vintage-themed photo booth on the Rue des Trois Frères that is described as a social media sensation. The transition to Paris becoming a commercialized city can also be seen with the rise of the popular 2020 Netflix show Emily in Paris, as it became a walking advertisement for Paris after accumulating over 50 million streams in its first month of release. Social media is very intertwined into the show, as the plot depicts an American working for a Parisian company while also managing a travel influencer career on Instagram, showing different sides of Paris. This tie-in to social media has led to new Instagrammable travel experiences inspired by the show, like the travel startup Dharma's Paris by Emily tours. These tours have been listed to include features such as the Palais Royal content capture experience and branded Polaroid photos. However, attending these tours are not necessary for tourists who want to experience the show, as plenty of digital itineraries on social media map out routes for visitors to see all the filming locations from the show. In addition, there are instances of featured businesses that have benefited from the show in their sales, like one of the show's bakeries, La Boulangerie Moderne, with 40% of its customer base coming from the Emily in Paris fandom, and Terra Nera, a small Italian restaurant whose red awnings were converted into the fictional restaurant Les Deux Compères. While Terra Nera itself has been met with not so positive online reviews of the food, this has not stopped the restaurant from being full of fans of the show. This phenomenon of tourists centering their travel itinerary to Paris around the television show has been dubbed as the Emily effect, and the response of Parisians towards these tourists has been overwhelmingly negative. The Daily Mail brings up the Parisian phrase "l'invasion des imbéciles," or the invasion of imbeciles, used to specifically target these tourist groups that can be often seen with Emily in Paris merchandise and wearing red berets. There are two factors making this tourism trend more noticeable. The first being that a majority of film locations for the show are concentrated in South Paris, especially in the Place de l'Estrapade, which was originally referred to as a quiet square, making the recent increase in crowds quite noticeable. The show also has many scenes outdoors, outside Emily's apartment, at her workplace, etc., so tourists want photographs in front of buildings, which leaves them predominantly outside. Local residents of South Paris who have not received the economic benefits from these visitors have demonstrated resistance through graffiti popping up in these neighborhoods with the tagline, "Emily Not Welcome." France Hotel Guide has framed this effect as a superficial kind of tourism where tourists leave Paris with only the Americanized view and don't properly engage with the culture. However, this claim only leads to more debate since it can be counter-argued that the show has led tourists outside of areas in Paris with popular landmarks. This idea of viewing the real Paris is not always well perceived by tourists, and there is actually a named condition for first-time tourists who feel Paris doesn't meet their romanticized expectations. Paris syndrome is a name created in the 1980s by Japanese psychiatrist Hiroaki Ota to describe tourists who experience immediate and extreme culture shock once arriving in Paris. Hiroaki created this term after he studied Japanese tourists who had symptoms of anxiety and hallucinations provoked by adjusting to the reality of Parisian life. While this framing of Paris as an idealized city has long existed in different mediums, Travel and Leisure magazine has described the hashtag of Paris on Instagram to serve as an online collection to see all these idealized images with an easy click. Chances are, if you do enough research into an attraction like the Mona Lisa, you will find out that it is usually an hour-long waiting experience within a disorganized crowd to briefly catch a glimpse of the small-sized painting. Aside from the filters and editing of content online that block out these crowds from posts, there are privileges given to influencers and celebrities that the general public are not allowed to share. Plenty of tourists have experienced disappointment once they realize giant crowds are formed in front of the Mona Lisa where security guards only give a few seconds for small groups to stand closer to the painting. The expectation that this experience is less chaotic and disappointing is not completely out of nowhere, though, as celebrities are often granted exclusive and private after-hour tours where they can see and take photos of the Mona Lisa up close. This projects the idea on social media that everyone who goes to the museum can have a similar experience when this is certainly not the case. The same narrative is often created for plenty of other tourist attractions in Paris on social media, which can contribute to the Paris syndrome phenomenon, as first-time visitors mistakenly think that Paris is an uncrowded, always clean, and romantic city when that is not the case. Paris syndrome would not occur if visitors were presented with a more adequate representation of the city, so their expectation beforehand would be more realistic. Additionally, since tourists often don't witness the crowdedness of Paris prior to visiting, they actively might not realize that their travel itinerary is contributing to over-tourism until they arrive in the city. On social media, there is not always a direct connection between local businesses and influencers who post about them, as plenty of user-generated content in Paris is created by independent accounts with no marketing deals. On June 5th, 2025, a user-generated video was posted to TikTok by a content creator advertising free salsa dance classes being offered in Paris every Tuesday at a speakeasy called Le Comptoir General. Exactly a month later, this video was uploaded as a repost to Paris Bucket List on Instagram Reels, where it received over 140,000 views. I had the recent opportunity to speak with the original poster of the viral Le Comptoir General video. Known as Nicole's Storybook on TikTok, Nicole is a travel content creator with a predominant focus on providing users with ideas on what to do during their Paris trips. Nicole currently has over 90,000 likes across her videos, and her video on Le Comptoir General on her personal TikTok page has reached over 200,000 views. She also frequently works with the app Hemblem to make content showcasing specific restaurants and businesses in France as well. I am so excited for you all to hear Nicole's inside perspective as a travel influencer.
When you go to film certain places in Paris, do you usually end up talking to like someone who works there and mention that you're going to feature them, and also to maybe sometimes get more information that you can include in your post? Or do sometimes you also just go and film it without really having to talk to the business as much?
So I think it depends. Sometimes if it's like a cool event, I don't even like talk to anyone. When I go with Hemblem, usually you do talk to them because sometimes they want you to do something specific. Like, oh, can you mention this? Oh, you can actually come like inside the kitchen and record this. Sometimes they're like, please don't record any of the workers. So usually when I go with the app, I talk more with the people because since you're making a video for them, you want to make a video that they would like to post. Sometimes I would get requests from restaurants or like activities in Paris where they would contact me.
Then do you think then those videos go more in the direction of reviews where you're kind of just reviewing your experience, or more like being a promoter of the business and promoting it in some way?
Yeah, I think mostly they just want like, real people to show their real experience. They don't want anything that seems too polished or too like marketing vibes. They just want someone who's enjoying what they're doing.
And then in terms of going to edit the videos, do you find that there's certain ways to like edit, or there's a certain way to that you found has helped increase engagement in terms of your videos?
Sometimes I do take some time and do a video for a while. I do voiceover, I speak to the camera, etc., and it doesn't perform well. And sometimes I just do a video with clips and just a song, and it worked. I did a video for free salsa classes that they do in Paris every Tuesday. I live very close to where it is. I live near the Canal Saint-Martin. So I used to go there sometimes just to have dinner with my friends. And then once I just saw like a poster that said like on Tuesdays we have free salsa class. I was like, oh my God, this is so fun. And so I just started going there. So I made the video and it went super viral. And even like, what's this account called? I think Paris Things to Do on Instagram, put it on their page. And I was like, why did that work so well? Like, I don't understand. I guess because sometimes things that are more niche and that people don't really talk about is what performs really well.
Yeah, it's actually funny you mentioned that, because I had written about that post that you had about the salsa dance class, because the funny story is I was in study abroad in the summer, and it was actually one of my friends had sent that video in my group chat, and we actually ended up going. I traced the reel from Paris bucket list, and because it did credit you in the caption, I was able to then find it back on your TikTok. When they asked to repost, do you think it's important that they ask you? Have you ever been in a situation where you've gotten something reposted that you didn't say anything about beforehand?
So actually they didn't ask me, which I found super
Cool.
surprising. Yeah, so I posted that video and then I think a few weeks later one of my friends sent me this video like, oh my God, this is you. Didn't even tag you. And I don't mind, but I did message them like, hey, if you're posting, maybe just let me know and like tag me. They didn't even respond. They just tagged me. Usually when I go to places and they invite me, they ask, oh, can I do a cross post like Instagram? And like they cross post and that's totally fine. But yeah, they didn't ask me. So that was very shocking.
Now that you say it, I'm so used to the common practice of people reposting and not tagging creators. You had to message and advocate for yourself. And I'm glad it was resolved, but I also think that it kind of relies on you being able to see that your content is being used somewhere. I'm going to give like one final question. You mentioned you just going to the salsa class on a regular basis before you filmed it, because you mentioned the people working there were nice. Do you think they ever knew that you were the one who had made that post?
I don't think they know that it was. I went 2 times after, but it was way too packed. Now, I haven't been there since last summer, but I remember the last time I went there, I was like, okay, I don't think I'm coming back for a while. I don't know if that happened because of me, I'm not really sure. But sometimes things get so well known on social media, and then you can't really enjoy the experience anymore because there's just too many people. But I don't know. I guess it's the pros and cons of doing those things.
Well, thank you so much for answering all the questions. I think it's been very helpful to hear inside view, especially like having seen your videos versus now it's like getting to hear perspective on making them.
I found it very insightful to hear Nicole's process behind creating what became one of her most viral videos. It is clear that the intention behind her original video was to take the information from what she had seen on a physical advertisement in the form of a poster and use her platform to share it with a larger audience. This video ultimately made the information about the Salsa Night more accessible, reaching an audience that might have yet to travel to Paris or not seen the posters for the event themselves. While Nicole's act of information sharing was always likely to bring in a larger audience, once the video was posted, she had no idea about how many people would then show up to future Salsa Nights and no control over who took her video and reposted it. The fact that Nicole, who resides in Paris herself, was unaffected by the crowds at Le Comptoir General and stopped regularly attending the Salsa Nights shows that travel influencers are not necessarily responsible for over-tourism. While they are the ones who create ideas for new posts, the way that social media posts are shared, engaged with, and turned into real-life action by viewers are all important factors, making it harder to gauge when social media will actually end up causing over-tourism. Le Comptoir General is far from being the only business that I experienced in Paris as a tourist attraction turned popular by social media. I also experienced a similar phenomenon when I went to the ice cream spot Bachir in Montmartre. This was actually a place I had not previously heard about on social media, but I was definitely attracted to as I was wandering the area by the queue running around the block. Bachir became popular on social media for its famous Lebanese ice cream achta, which is the most popular flavor, completely covered in pistachios. There were at least 3 workers in the queue who hand out menus to waiting customers and answer their questions, informing them that they need to be ready when it is time to order at the register. I have come to find out Bachir is one of numerous ice cream spots in Paris that currently has a queue management, with Folderol in the 11th arrondissement as another example. Folderol opened in 2020 as a small bar in Paris serving wine and ice cream with the intention of welcoming families, as parents could drink wine while their children enjoyed ice cream. However, influencers on Instagram tried to change this altogether, as they started posting themselves having picnics on the sidewalk next to Folderol, fully dressed up while enjoying wine and ice cream combos. The eventual overcrowding of the small bar and the surrounding street was eventually met with a response from the business, as it displayed new rules outside asking customers not to film TikToks, not to purchase items from the business for the purpose of taking photos, and for customers with children to be allowed to move to the front of the queue. This action of Folderol taking back control was featured in the New York Times in 2023, along with other measures including hiring a bouncer for crowd control and banning customers from sitting on the sidewalks. Resistance against over-tourism in Paris is not exclusive to responses from businesses, as there are more formal organizations that have gathered community members with the common goal of combating over-tourism. The Association de Défense de Montmartre du 18e arrondissement, ADDM-18, has actually existed since the 1970s with a mission to preserve the landscape heritage of Montmartre. A few of ADDM-18's core objectives include controlling noise pollution and protecting public spaces from being converted for commercial purposes. While the intentions of the group are clearly listed online, a lot of the news and information regarding the ADDM-18's efforts and achievements have restricted access for members only. The group as a whole is deviating from the expectation of having intense public demonstrations against tourists and instead advocating for internal policy changes. When it comes to mass visible protests against over-tourism, the June 16, 2025 protest of Louvre workers is quite noticeable. The staff of the Louvre decided to strike spontaneously due to a shared sentiment of too large crowds visiting the museum, causing the museum to then shut down until these demands were met. The strike was quite effective, as it caused the Louvre to change the operation of their peak summer season to be based on entry times only, preventing visitors from rope dropping the museum with same-day tickets. This also came with the effect of tourists having to plan ahead of time if and when they want to visit the Louvre, especially when sometimes the earliest available times would be for a week after reserving. Tourists were inconvenienced to a degree by this new policy, but it is important to note that the change needed to be made within the museum's system, as it was not the fault of tourists that they were entering a place that didn't limit their capacity. Based on all previous examples, the general attitude of Parisians seems to be expressing distaste or direct unfriendliness towards tourists entering areas of the city that locals did not have to share with visitors prior to the effects of social media. However, when it comes to activism, Parisians are fighting more against inadequate living and working conditions than directing their frustrations straight towards tourists. That being said, while Paris is no stranger to over-tourism and relationships remain tense between Parisians and tourists seeking for a romanticized aesthetic of the city, the relationship between these two populations has not been intensified enough to be considered a mass conflict. Thank you so much for joining us today on Tourism Unfiltered. Stay tuned for the next episode as we investigate social media's impact on the diversity of Barcelona, Spain. Until next time, goodbye!